There's a number no leader wants to say out loud. A number that won't sit still. It climbs. It crawls. It refuses to behave. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion on February 24, 2022, the plan in Moscow read like a brisk triumphalist pamphlet. Decapitate the government, parade through Kyiv, sign a treaty in the rubble. Instead, the war slowed into something older and harsher. Mines, trenches, long artillery duels. Towns fought over twice and mourned 3 times. The most decisive map wasn't the front line. It was the casualty ledger. Soldiers, civilians, the wounded, the missing, futures that wouldn't happen. That ledger is the real measure of this war, and it's the part no one can escape.
Early forecasts got humbled. Kyiv did not fall. Ukraine did not fracture. The Russian airborne units sent to seize Hostomel airfield, they found something else waiting for them. Javelins determined locals in a city that refused to be bullied into surrender. By the spring of 2022, Ukraine had held the line, protecting its statehood and its capital. By autumn, it had pushed Russia out of the north and from west of the Dnipro River. The headlines adjusted, but the battlefield had already recalculated on its own brutal terms. This wasn't going to be a quick fight. It was a war of industrial stamina and human endurance. And in that kind of war, the most important battle is often fought with numbers. Shell production, barrel life, replacement training, casualty evacuation. Sometimes the greatest victory is simply not losing more than your enemy on any given day. Let's start with the definition that often gets lost in the noise. Casualties aren't just the dead. They are the wounded, the missing, and the captured. Every single person a country has to replace to keep fighting tomorrow. Russia entered this war with a population more than 3 times the size of Ukraine's. On paper, it's a massive advantage, a deep reserve of manpower. But in practice, depth isn't destiny. Quality, training, leadership, and the efficiency of a medical chain can bend demographics. A smaller, more motivated defender, armed with Western training and intelligence, can trade blows more effectively. It can do this by protecting its soldiers with air defense, dispersing its ammunition, and learning from its mistakes faster than its opponent. This is exactly what Ukraine has tried to do, and it's what Russia has tried to crush with sheer mass and persistence. But even with all that, the numbers still matter. In a rare moment of transparency, breaking a long-held taboo, President Volodymyr Zelensky provided a national figure. He stated that more than 46,000 Ukrainian soldiers had been killed, with around 380,000 wounded. These aren't just statistics. They represent the immense human cost of defending a nation, a cost that grows with every passing day. This is the reality of a war of attrition, where survival itself is a form of victory. The numbers are staggering, almost impossible to comprehend. When President Zelensky announced Ukraine's military losses, the figure landed with a heavy, unavoidable thud. It was a rare official anchor in a sea of speculation and misinformation. But he was also clear, this number wasn't complete. It didn't include the tens of thousands still missing or held in captivity, perhaps the most painful statistic of all for the families left waiting. Beyond official statements, there are other efforts trying to grasp the true scale of this tragedy. Projects are meticulously documenting Ukrainian military fatalities, one name at a time. They scan open sources, building a public archive of the fallen. It's more than just a list. It's a tragic phone book of a nation at war, reminding us that behind every number is a life, a family, and a story cut short. By late 2025, these bottom-up tallies had already identified over 165,000 individuals lost since the full-scale invasion began, even more when counting from 2014. On the other side, the picture is just as grim, though shrouded in official silence. Independent journalists from outlets like Mediazona and BBC News Russia have taken on the grisly task of verifying Russian military deaths. They sift through obituaries, court records, and even photos from cemeteries to confirm each loss by name. By mid-November 2025, they had confirmed over 147,000 Russian soldiers and contractors killed. And everyone involved in this painstaking work agrees, this is a conservative floor. The true figure is almost certainly much higher. Many deaths simply never appear in public records. Analysts estimate these databases might only capture about half to two-thirds of the actual toll. It represents a scale of loss that the Kremlin consistently refuses to acknowledge publicly. These numbers, whether from Ukraine or Russia, are not just statistics for a report. They are individual tragedies multiplied by the hundreds of thousands. They are the devastating, undeniable human cost of this conflict. Each number was once a person with hopes, dreams, and a future. Understanding this is crucial to understanding the true weight of war. When we look at the human cost of the war in Ukraine, the numbers are staggering. By November 2025, UK Ministry of Defense estimated that Russia had likely suffered around 1.14 million military casualties since the full-scale invasion began. This figure includes both the killed and the wounded, and it paints a brutal picture of the daily reality. British intelligence pointed out that in October 2025 alone, Russia's average daily casualty rate was about 1,000 soldiers. This isn't just an abstract statistic. It's 1,000 names added to a nation's trauma every single day. The impact on civilians is equally devastating. The UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine has confirmed over 53,000 civilian casualties, with more than 14,500 killed and 38,000 injured between February 22 and October 2025, and they repeatedly stress that the true toll is much higher, as many areas remain inaccessible or are under occupation. Just in October 2025, at least 148 civilians were killed and 929 were injured. This mirrors a punishing pattern seen since the summer, with drones and missiles striking cities, glide bombs pulverizing towns near the front, and air defenses constantly racing to keep up. In fact, by November 2025, monitors warned that civilian casualties for the year had already surpassed the total for all of 2024. These are the undeniable human costs behind every operational map. The nature of the fighting has evolved, but the brutality remains. Russia's assaults on places like Bakhmut and Avdiivka involved relentless artillery and waves of infantry, including penal storm units, sent to wear down Ukrainian defenses at a terrible cost. Throughout 2023 and 2024, these formations were often used as sacrificial screens to protect more valuable regular units. This tactic can gain ground, but it leads to a horrifyingly high dead-to-wounded ratio. When you can't recover your wounded quickly, more of them become fatalities. In contrast, Ukraine's losses often spiked during its own offensives against heavily fortified Russian lines or when overwhelmed by massed artillery fire. But over the long term, Ukraine has relied on better small unit leadership, NATO-style training, and a hard-learned doctrine of dispersion. In many battles, the kill ratio favored Kyiv, especially when Russia was attacking well-prepared defenses. This wasn't just a tactical advantage, it was political. Western audiences don't study trench maps, but they do pay attention to casualty comparisons. The better Ukraine could demonstrate its effectiveness, the stronger its case for continued international support became. By 2025, new hardware began to shift the attrition math. The arrival of F-16s in early February was a major symbolic and practical boost, helping to secure the skies over critical areas and disrupt Russian glide bomb attacks. At the same time, long-range ATACMS with a 300-kilometer reach, first used discreetly in 2024, were deployed for deep strikes into Russia by mid-November 2025, hitting logistics hubs and air assets far behind the front lines. While this didn't completely turn the tables, it allowed Ukraine to impose higher costs on Russia's rear areas, forcing Moscow to spend more on air defense and dispersal. In a war of resources, making the other side's bill longer is a form of victory. Then there's the insidious legacy of mines. They're the cruelest interest payment on every kilometer of land gained or lost, according to estimates from the UN and demining agencies. Roughly 139,000 square kilometers, or about 23% of Ukraine's territory, is potentially contaminated with mines and unexploded ordnance. The Halo Trust has called Ukraine one of the most heavily mined countries on Earth. This isn't just a safety nightmare, it's an economic tourniquet. The World Bank estimates the cost of clearing this land runs into the tens of billions of dollars. While Reuters calculated the annual economic loss due to landmines at around $11 billion, Demining is slow, dangerous work. But it's the difference between a country merely surviving a war and one that can truly recover. So what does this all mean for each side's ability to continue the fight? Russia can force replenishment of its ranks, but this erodes the quality of its forces. The social burden is also unevenly distributed, with data from Mediazona and BBC. Russia showing that casualties disproportionately come from poorer regions with fewer economic opportunities, a grim pattern that persisted from 2023 through 2025. This raises critical questions about the long-term sustainability and social cohesion for both nations caught in this devastating conflict. How do you count the cost of a war? It's the question everyone asks, but the true death toll isn't a simple number. The honest answer is, outside of closed archives, no one can give you a perfect figure, but we can get close to the truth. Early on, a bias correction model showed Russia has suffered more fatalities and tends to underreport its own dead, while both sides inflate enemy losses. Open source data, like cemetery counts and obituaries, confirm thousands of Russian and Ukrainian dead by name. Meanwhile, Western intelligence assessments push aggregate Russian casualties toward 1 million. Together, these sources paint a brutal, stable picture. Russia has paid more in blood to move the line. Ukraine has paid heavily to hold it, and civilians absorb a steady share of the violence, regardless of who advances. But the spreadsheets don't capture the full story, the minds that will maim for decades. The trauma echoing in households that lost a breadwinner or a child. The amputees relearning their bodies, factories turned to rubble will be line items in reconstruction budgets for years. When we talk about the death toll, we mean the dead. But there's a second toll, measured in years of life lost, in GDP foregone, in a nation's demography forever dented. That second toll compounds every single day. Then there's the ledger of law and mercy. Unmonitors report an alarming rise in executions of captured Ukrainian soldiers by Russian forces documented through videos, photos, and witness testimony. Torture of civilians in occupied areas has been described as systematic. This isn't statistical noise. It's the moral texture of the war. Even one execution is one too many. Strategically, casualty rates decide what victory can even look like. If Russia keeps buying a kilometer at the cost of hundreds of lives, success is just holding wreckage with exhausted troops. If Ukraine has to push through minefields without full air superiority, it pays dearly for every breach. This is why F-16s matter not as magic wands, but to protect the medevac routes that turn wounded soldiers into survivors. This is why long-range missiles matter craring. A depot far behind the lines means fewer shells on a Ukrainian trench tomorrow. On a war of attrition, anything that reduces your losses is a quiet revolution. So, where does this go? It's probably not toward a clean victory from a single offensive. It's more likely a continued grind with periodic shocks, a sudden collapse of a sector, drone swarm breakthrough, or a political shift. The daily casualty rate will remain the most accurate pulse. For Russia, the question is whether it can keep replacing its losses faster than the social contract cracks. For Ukraine, it's whether its allies can keep the ammunition flowing and technology can keep bending the exchange rate in its favor. Two lessons feel safe. First, transparency, however painful, stabilizes strategy. When President Zelensky named the number of fallen soldiers, he gave Ukrainians an honest baseline for their sacrifice. Second, precision and protection are the cheapest ways to save lives in an expensive war. More drone jammers, more air defenses, more armored ambulances. These aren't glamorous, but they are what quietly shrink the toll. The true cost of this war isn't a single number to etch in granite. It's a moving ledger that records how each day's choices affect tomorrow's survivors. Russia can likely absorb higher absolute losses. Ukraine can probably keep getting more from each soldier. But in the end, the side that best converts its pain material, moral, and political into staying power will get to write the final page. This brings us back to the only question that matters at the end of every day of this war. Did what we did today make tomorrow's toll smaller? If yes, keep going. If no, something's strategy, supply, or courage has to change. Because the truest measure of victory here is not a flag inching across a map. It's the number of lives that never need to be added to the list. Thanks for watching.